The following record, pulled straight from the declassified vaults of the Federal Bureau of Investigation under serial number 438, documents an event so perplexing that federal agents were dispatched to a remote New Mexico desert to map out physical trace evidence of an encounter that defies conventional explanation. What makes this official dossier truly chilling is not just what was witnessed in the sky, but the physical remnants left in the desert floor and the strange handwritten geometric diagrams buried at the very back of this government file, which we will dismantle piece by piece by the end of this investigation. Before we uncover those baffling mathematical sketches and what they imply about the landing footprint, we must look at how this extraordinary afternoon began, tracking a timeline recorded by a federal investigator who was physically present in the local police headquarters when the chaos erupted. It was late afternoon on April 24th, 1964, in the small town of Socorro, New Mexico. Special Agent D. Arthur Burns, Jr. of the Albuquerque FBI office was sitting inside the state police office on routine business. Everything seemed completely standard, but at approximately 5:45 to 5:50 p.m., the heavy silence of the hallway was shattered. Nep Lopez, the radio operator working just 30 feet down the hall in the Socorro County Sheriff's Office, burst into the room. He was visibly urgent. Lopez turned to Sergeant M.S. Chavez of the New Mexico State Police to relay a message that had just crackled over the radio waves. It was a transmission from an active patrolman named Lonnie Zamora, calling frantically from an isolated area roughly 1 mile southwest of town. The operator explained that Zamora was calling for immediate backup regarding an unknown object, but it was the exact phrasing of the radio transmission that caused everyone in the room to freeze. The operator stated the call was in relation to some unknown object which had physically landed and has taken off. Think about that for a second. This is not a report of a distant light in the sky or a vague silhouette shifting through the clouds. This was a direct, real-time alert from a police officer stating that a completely unidentified craft had just touched down on the earth and launched back into the air. Agent Burns quickly wrapped up his official paperwork by 6 p.m. and immediately rushed out to the coordinate site. When he arrived at the rough desert terrain, a small, tense assembly of law enforcement was already there, standing over a patch of disturbed earth. Officer Zamora was present, flanked by Socorro County Undersheriff Jim Lucky, Sergeant Chavez, and Officer Ted Jordan. Now, in many anomalous reports, skeptics immediately tried to discredit the source, blaming poor vision, panic, or intoxication. But listen to how the FBI agent explicitly details the character of the primary witness in this official record. Agent Burns writes that he had known Officer Zamora intimately for approximately 5 years. He formally describes him as a sober, industrious, and conscientious officer who is absolutely not given to fantasy. When the agent walked up to him on that gravel mesa, he noted that Zamora was perfectly sober, but deeply, noticeably agitated over his experience. This was a seasoned patrolman who had just seen something that broke his understanding of reality. Hold on here, because this detail gets even stranger when combined with what the investigators found when they looked down at the ground. Special Agent Burns walked into the rough, sandy terrain and immediately identified 4 distinct indentations pressed deep into the earth at the exact site where Zamora claimed the object had rested. These were not random scuffs or natural erosions. The FBI report describes these depressions as perfectly regular in shape, forming a series of rectangular dugouts measuring approximately 16 inches by 6 inches. When you read between the lines of this physical description, the mechanics of the event become incredibly eerie. The FBI agent noted that each individual depression seemed to have been made by a heavy object entering the earth at a distinct angle from a central line. Each indentation dug roughly 2 inches deep into the soil, violently pushing a mound of loose earth toward the far side. The symmetry was absolute.
But it was what lay directly inside these structural geometric marks that truly baffled the field agents. Inside the perimeter of the four main depressions, the investigators found three distinct, heavily burned patches of grass clumps. Yet, strangely, other clumps of grass in the exact same immediate area appeared completely undisturbed, completely green and untouched by heat. To make matters even more confusing, a fourth burned area was discovered entirely outside the four main leg depressions. Can you believe this is actually written in an official federal document? We are looking at a scene where immense, localized thermal energy scorched specific patches of desert vegetation while leaving neighboring blades of grass perfectly intact, all framed by a geometric four-point structural compression layout. And the physical clues did not stop there. As the agents combed through the sand, they discovered three highly unusual circular marks pressed into the earth. These markings were completely smooth, measured roughly 4 inches in diameter, and penetrated the sandy earth to a depth of approximately 1/8 of an inch. The FBI agent described them as looking exactly as if a standard jar lid had been gently, uniformly pushed down into the loose sand. The investigation team searched the surrounding darkness for any signs of conventional explanation, but the report explicitly states that no other persons were noted in the area that night, and no other physical objects were found that could possibly connect the incident to any earthly machinery or standard human activity. There were no houses, no inhabited dwellings, and absolutely nothing in sight across the barren landscape. But what exactly did Zamora experience in the moments leading up to this physical scarring of the desert floor? The file shifts directly into the raw, unedited data obtained directly from Zamora's personal testimony, dictated during intense interviews spanning the night of April 24th into the early morning hours of April 25th. By analyzing his direct narrative, we can reconstruct the exact sequence of events, a sequence that began as a routine high-speed traffic pursuit. Zamora stated that at approximately 5:45 p.m., he was operating Socorro Police Car Number 2, a white 1964 Pontiac. He was positioned on the west side of the local courthouse when he spotted a new black Chevrolet speeding excessively south due. The vehicle was roughly 3 blocks ahead of him, tearing down Old Rodeo Street toward the open rodeo grounds. Zamora was alone in his cruiser, entirely focused on catching the speeder. He suspected the driver might have been a local 17-year-old youth, and he was pushing his patrol car to close the distance. But as he raced past an isolated area near the Murillo residence, a sudden, massive roar tore through the sky. At the exact same instant, a brilliant flash of flame erupted in the southwest sky, roughly a half-mile to a mile away. Zamora's immediate instinct wasn't to think of a spaceship or a secret military aircraft. Given the remote location, his mind instantly jumped to a highly practical hazard. He knew there was a dynamite shack located out in those hills, and he assumed the storage facility had just catastrophically blown up. Deciding that a potential explosion and human casualty took absolute priority over a speeding ticket, Zamora abandoned the chase and swung his police cruiser toward the source of the flame. He described the flame as a striking, shifting blend of bluish and orange hues. It was sort of motionless, slowly descending toward the earth. Because he was still actively maneuvering his car over a highly treacherous, unpaved gravel road, he couldn't keep his eyes pinned to the sky, but the visual characteristics he caught were deeply unusual. It was a narrow, stream-down type of flame, taking on a distinct funnel shape that was significantly narrower at its apex than at its base. From his perspective, the flame appeared to be roughly 3 degrees in width, twice as wide at the bottom as it was at the top, and roughly 4 times as high as its top width. At this point, we can no longer call this a standard industrial fire. Zamora noted that the sun was dipping into the west, severely hindering his vision, and he was wearing green prescription sunglasses as he scanned the horizon. He couldn't see the absolute base of the funnel because it was obscured behind a rising hill, but he noticed a violent commotion kicking up at the bottom. It looked like a massive cloud of dust being whipped up into the air.
It was an incredibly windy day, and the gale was blowing hard across an otherwise clear, sunny sky, punctuated by only a few scattered clouds. But the audio profile of the event is what truly bothered the veteran officer. The noise was a heavy, continuous roar, absolutely not a sharp blast like an explosion, and noticeably different from the high-pitched whine of a standard jet engine. Zamora knew exactly what conventional military jets sounded like, and this wasn't it. Instead, the acoustic frequency of this roar steadily shifted, transitioning from a piercing high frequency down to a deep, low-frequency rumble, before stopping completely. The entire auditory event lasted roughly 10 seconds as he bounced along the rocky road. The sound and the flame vanished simultaneously. The sound dropped distinctly from high to low until it completely disappeared into total silence. Both of his cruiser windows were rolled down, yet no other traffic or spectators were anywhere to be seen. The speeding black Chevrolet ahead of him had driven too deep behind the contour of the hill, leaving Zamora completely alone as he approached the crest. What happened next is where the narrative takes a truly surreal turn. To reach the site of the suspected explosion, Zamora had to guide his police cruiser up a steep, punishingly rough hill. The hill was roughly 60 feet long, heavily covered in loose gravel and jagged rocks. On his first attempt, he made it only halfway up before his tires lost traction and began skidding violently, while the distant roar was still echoing through the air. He had to back the heavy Pontiac all the way down the slope and attempted twice more before finally conquering the incline. By the time he began his third attempt, the roar and the flame had ceased entirely. Upon clearing the crest, he began traveling very slowly westward along a primitive dirt track. For about 10 to 15 seconds, he saw absolutely nothing. He crawled forward, scanning the desert floor, trying to locate the exact position of the dynamite shack, which he hadn't visited in some time. Then, out of nowhere, his eyes locked on to a highly reflective, shiny object resting to the south, roughly 150 to 200 yards off the main path. He slammed on his brakes. At first glance, his brain struggled to process what he was looking at. Because of its color and position, he initially thought a standard automobile had flipped upside down. He assumed some local kids had been joyriding through the arroyo and suffered a horrific accident. But as he stared through his windshield, he caught sight of something even more shocking. Standing very close to the metallic object were two distinct figures dressed in brilliant white coveralls. Hold on, because this is where the FBI file describes an interactive moment that sent a shockwave of adrenaline through the officer. Zamora observed that one of these white-clad figures seemed to suddenly turn around, looking straight at his police cruiser. The figure appeared visibly startled by the arrival of law enforcement and seemed to quickly jump in surprise. Zamora noted that when he first glimpsed the craft and mistook it for an overturned car, he distinctly saw what appeared to be two structural legs or supports extending from the underside of the main body down to the desert earth. At that exact second, he didn't obsess over the engineering. He was entirely focused on rushing to the aid of what he believed were two injured motorists. He remembered these legs were positioned at the absolute bottom of the object, slanting sharply outward to meet the ground, holding the main belly of the craft roughly 3.5 feet above the dirt. He had only stopped his vehicle for a couple of seconds to process this scene before accelerating quickly toward them to render assistance. During that brief pause, he noted that the structure of the object looked like solid aluminum. It was a bright, clean, whitish hue against the stark mesa background, but it didn't possess the reflective mirror finish of chrome. It was completely smooth. Its overall orientation made it look like a white car standing unnaturally on its radiator or its trunk. That 2-second glance was the only time he would ever lay eyes on the mysterious figures in white.
He couldn't recall seeing any distinct facial features, hats, or specialized headgear. He simply stated that they appeared entirely normal in shape, though they were notably small in stature, resembling either small adults or large children. As Zamora drove closer, the terrain forced him to divert his attention back to the hazardous road. He grabbed his radio microphone and called into the sheriff's office, transmitting a code 1044, indicating a possible automobile accident. He informed the dispatcher he would be code 106, meaning busy, as he got out to check on the vehicle down in the arroyo. He brought the Pontiac to a final stop, still communicating over the air. As he started to open his door, his fingers slipped and the radio microphone dropped heavily to the floorboards. He leaned back into the cabin to retrieve it, slotted the mic back into its dashboard cradle, and stepped out into the desert wind, turning his body toward the arroyo. But just as he cleared the door, a series of heavy, physical sounds echoed from the gully. Zamora reported hearing 2 or 3 incredibly loud thumps, describing them as sounding exactly like someone hammering metal or slamming a massive structural door shut with immense force. These thumps were spaced less than a second apart, echoing right before a new wave of sound erupted. When he looked back into the wash, the 2 figures in white coveralls had completely vanished from the scene. Suddenly, a massive roar tore through the air once again. At this close range, the volume was staggering, vibrating through his entire body. It started as a deep, low frequency and rapidly escalated into a deafening, high-pitched scream. Simultaneously, a fierce flame erupted directly underneath the craft. The object began to lift, rising slowly and perfectly straight up into the air. From this new, closer angle, Zamora realized he was looking at the side profile of the vessel rather than its end. The flame was a brilliant blue light, shifting into a deep orange at its lowest point. The sheer acoustic violence of the propulsion made him genuinely believe the entire thing was about to catastrophically detonate right in front of him. He estimated that the flame plume was emerging from a 4-foot area, located squarely in the middle of the underside, producing 0 smoke, but kicking up a massive cloud of localized dust. Terrified by the roaring sound and the threat of an imminent explosion, Zamora spun on his heel and fled. He ran blindly to the north, trying to position the heavy chassis of his police car between his body and the ascending craft. As he panicked, he slammed his leg hard against the back fender of the Pontiac. The impact knocked his prescription glasses clean off his face, sending them flying into the dirt. He left them where they fell, continuing his desperate sprint. But as he ran, he couldn't resist turning his head to look back. He noted that the object was entirely smooth, completely devoid of any visible windows or structural doors. But right in the center of the aluminum white body, he spotted something highly specific, a large insignia printed in deep red.